Okay, welcome to the Standing Committee on Intergovernmental Affairs and Justice. My name is Terry Dennis. I'm chairing the committee, and we have committee members here. We have Vicky Moat, Deputy Chair, filling in for Erica Ritchie, Gary Gruwell, we got Travis Kiesig, we got Hugh Nerlin filling in for Tim McLeod, and Greg Ottenbreit. I'd like to advise the committee that pursuant to Rule 148.1, the 2022-23 supplementary drafts, number 1, were committed to the Standing Committee on Intergovernmental Affairs and Justice on November 29th, 2022. Vote 73, Corrections and Policing and Public Safety. Vote 30, Government Relations. Vote 27, Parks, Culture and Sport. Today, the committee will be considering these supplementary estimates. We will begin our considerations with vote 30, Government Relations, subvote GR07, Municipal Relations, subvote GR12, First Nations, Métis, and Northern Affairs. I would ask that the officials please introduce themselves before they speak for the first time, and do not touch the microphones. The Hansard operator will turn them on when you're speaking. Minister, please introduce your officials and make your opening comments.
Great, thank you. I'll try not to touch the mic. It's kind of an old habit, but we'll try our best. Thank you for the committee for being here on a busy Wednesday. There's a lot going on today. I'm joined here this afternoon by, on my right, my Deputy Minister, Laurier Donnet, and on my left, Sheldon Green, the Assistant Deputy Minister. Government relations has two pressures that arose during the fiscal year. First, government relation requires an additional $12.4 million in gaming related payments to be paid to First Nation organizations for emergency pandemic support for First Nations and Métis organizations. This payment reflects actual profits generated by the Saskatchewan Indian Gaming Authority casinos in 21-22. This completes the government's obligations under the Pandemic Support Letter of Understanding signed by the province and the Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations. The second, on February 17th, 2022, the federal government of Canada announced an investment of up to $750 million to provide $1.5 billion nationwide support to municipalities, economic recovery in transit operations shortfalls, and encouraging housing affordability. Saskatchewan received $11.7 million in federal funding to be cost matched and be put towards the shared priorities of the one-time funding program. The federal funding must be allocated to municipalities based on transit ridership. Funding will be provided to 7 municipalities that run conventional transit systems. That will conclude my remarks on these two pressures, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Minister. Before we move on to questions, I would just note that Ms. Lisa Lambert has joined us, and we'll now move on to questions.
Thank you, Minister McMorris, and the officials for joining us here today. And I appreciate some of your opening remarks, which I think will springboard me into some questions about these additional allocations. So in terms of the I guess we can go by vote. In terms of the GR12 vote on emergency pandemic support for First Nations and Métis organizations, so we're talking about $12.4 million. I wonder if you can just explain again how this money came about. So you're saying that it was which specific programs benefited that led to these dollars being allocated here?
Laurier Donnet, Deputy Minister, Ministry of Government Relations. So what the $12.4 million really relates to is the letter of understandings that we had for the 2020-21 and the 21-22 fiscal years, because casinos were closed for good portions of those years. There was pandemic support, so really what the letter of understanding provided for was an additional payment above sort of what was in the estimates for those years, and it related to net profits from the SIGA casinos over those 2 years. So in the first year, there was actually a net loss. And then the second year in 21-22, there was a net profit. And so the letter of understanding allowed for an additional 25% of the combination of those two, that net loss and that net profit. So an additional 25% was provided to the First Nation organizations, so the First Nations Trust, and then there were 6 active community development corporations that shared in that funding.
Can you indicate what 6 community development corporations those were?
Sure. So as I mentioned, it was the First Nations Trust, and then the 6 community development corporations would be the Northern Lights Community Development Corporation, the Dakota Dunes Community Development Corporation, Battlefords Agency Tribal Council, Community Development Corporation, Painted Hand Community Development Corporation, and the Bear Claw CDC. Oh, and the Living Sky Community Development Corporation. So it would be those 6 that would have shared in it.
How was it determined which 6 would receive the allocation?
So those were the 6 active CDCs that were actually in operation at the beginning of the pandemic.
And there is not an extension to 22-23 fiscal year?
No, in 22-23 we reverted back to the gaming framework agreement and the distribution formula contained within that.
Okay. Is there an indication of what these dollars will go to fund, or is it sort of operational?
Yeah, they fund similar items that would be identified in the gaming framework agreement. Just to name a few, it would be sort of economic development, social development, educational, recreational. There's quite a list of different activities that can be funded, both on the First Nations Trust side of things as well as the community development corporations.
Thank you. And in terms of the letter of understanding that existed, was there any consideration given to extending this into the 22-23 fiscal year, based on some of the impacts that the industries have faced this year in the ongoing pandemic?
Yeah, there really wasn't a need. As I mentioned, in 21-22, the SIGA casinos did realize a net profit. I think it was around 61 million or something like that. So they were pretty much back to regular business and that, and so there really wasn't a need to extend provisions of the LOU.
Do you want to say something?
Just say it. I mean, it just follows along with the cycle of the COVID restrictions. I mean, there were restrictions in place that caused a loss of revenue. Mm-hmm. That isn't the case in this fiscal year, so it would make sense that we would go back to the original agreement, which is reflective of the actual money that is being invested into spent in the casinos.
Thank you. In terms of so year 1, there was a net loss, and then year 2, there was a net profit for the SIGA casinos. Was this expenditure? So obviously, we're at supplementary estimates. So how was this not aligned with what was in the budget? How were we unable to predict sort of what this number was going to look like?
Yeah, so the way the LOU, and this is really the way the GFA works as well, we need those year ends to be completed and audited, right? So March of 2022 would be the year end of SIGA, but by the time they get audited financial statements, those usually don't come out until probably about July, right? So we can't do those calculations and those reconciliation payments, that are tied to the GFA until after the end of the fiscal year. So
So it was merely a feature of the timelines that were reality for us, that we couldn't forecast this.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. In terms of the vote GR07, Government Relations, Transit and Housing Support, we spoke to this briefly here. So there are dollars coming from the federal government, and those are being matched here. Is that what's happening with this allocation?
Yeah, that's right. When the federal government announced this additional funding, they asked that provinces match, the funding that that is provided here for transit. Basically, it's to cover off losses that were incurred, by municipalities that have public transit systems, and so that was one of the requirements. That's right.
Thank you. And then this is the same amount dollar for dollar that the federal government provided?
Well, actually, this 11.7 is really so the federal government provided the funding to the province. The province took it into revenue in the current fiscal year, but we didn't have that federal government contribution in our appropriation, and so that's what this is for the federal government's share of it, I guess.
Yeah,
in year, yeah.
Okay, so this, that makes sense to me, okay. And you mentioned transit initiatives. So which communities received these funds?
So the communities that receive the funding are communities that have, a form of a transit already in place. So it's Saskatoon, Regina, Prince Albert, Moose Jaw, North Battleford, Swift Current, and Yorkton.
And
it goes on ridership, so that amount will vary from the larger community with larger ridership is going to get the majority of the money. Regina and Saskatoon being those two.
so can you speak to how the number was determined?
The 11 point.
Thanks for the question. Sheldon Green, Assistant Deputy Minister. The federal government determined the 11.7 million for Saskatchewan, and that was when they used the public transit analysis that was done under the Integrated Bilateral Agreement for the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program, because it was, I believe it would be expedient for them to have said, okay, this is what we looked at for transit funding under ICIP. We'll give you a percentage share that is relative to that, which worked out to 11.7 million.
And from there, it was divided up by the province in terms of the amount of ridership each community typically has, or what was that? How did that work?
Yes, it was based on ridership analysis numbers that we took the average from 2015 through to 2021, and then the operating losses can be associated back as far as 2019 through to 2021. And from that, we were able to determine calculations for each of the 7 communities.
So it was a flat sort of percentage share calculation, or were there any other factors that were included in that decision-making?
Well, the relative share would be larger if you had a larger ridership, but the factor would have been consistent across each of them, relatively speaking.
Okay, thank you. And can you provide a breakdown of what the dollars were per community that you listed?
The 11.674 breaks down that Saskatoon will get 6.518 million. Regina will get 4.732 million. Prince Albert would get 207,000. Moose Jaw would get 172,000. North Battleford 12,000. Swift Current 14,000, and Yorkton 15,000. And that is, as Deputy Minister Green had mentioned, it's a number per head. And that's how that is figured.
Thank you. What sort of feedback have you heard from these communities about, whether these amounts are sufficient for the operating losses that they have incurred?
So I guess we really haven't done, a lot of consultation with the communities because we haven't had this appropriation. It's going out now. But what I can say is that a couple of the mayors have certainly been listening to this and wondering, are we going to get our 11.7 overall provincially, and then when can they expect it? So they're expecting it. I think it would be safe to say that it's never enough to offset some of the losses that they've had. I mean, cities subsidize transit every year. It's just through the pandemic, of course, it was even more difficult because the ridership was so reduced. Again, this is a federally generated program, and we're there just to receive and then distribute by population, by ridership.
Thank you. In terms of this program, is this a one-time payment here?
Yeah, we believe it is, unless they decide they're going to do something next year, and then it is a one-time one-time to recognize the pressures that public transit has been under across Canada. You can imagine if we're having this pressure, what some of the larger cities like Toronto and Montreal that have such a huge public transit system and are relied on so heavily. So, yeah. There could be other pressures from other municipalities, cities, for example, to continue this on. They're always looking for more federal/provincial money.
Okay, thank you so much. That concludes my questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Seeing no more questions, we'll proceed to vote. Before we do, I'd ask the minister if he has any closing comments before voting.
No, other than to thank my officials. We've got a real strong team behind the three of us here, and they didn't get to say anything, but maybe in the spring budget they'll have more to say.
Mo, do you have any closing comments?
Thank you for your time, for the work that went into preparing these, as well as delivering the programs.
Thank you. We'll now move into voting on government relations. Vote 30. Municipal subvote GR 07 in the amount of 11 million, sorry. I'm not used to so much money. 11,674,000. Is that agreed? Carried. First Nations, Métis, Northern Affairs subvote GR 12 in the amount of $12,412,000. Is that agreed? Carried. I will now ask him. Sorry. Government relations vote 30 of $24,086,000. Is that? Oh, okay. Yeah. That's. Okay, I'll ask a member to move the following resolution. Resolve that there be granted to His Majesty for the 12 months ending March 31st, 2023, the following sum of government relations in the amount of $24,086,000. Do I have a mover? Mr. Ottenbright, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Full name.
Right across there, right on top of this.
Okay.
Perfect.
There. Okay. We'll now have a brief recess while we change officials. Number 1 for vote 27, Parks, Culture and Sport, subvote PC 18, Resource Stewardship, and subvote of PC 19, Community Engagement. I'd ask that the officials please introduce themselves before they speak the first time, and please do not touch the microphones. Hansard operator will turn them on for you. Minister, please introduce your officials and make your opening comments.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm pleased to be here today to answer your questions related to the supplementary estimates for the Ministry of Parks, Culture and Sport. First, I would like to start with introductions, followed by some brief remarks. The officials joining me today are Molly Waldman, my Chief of Staff, Deputy Minister Twyla McDougall, Dan French, Assistant Deputy Minister, Stewards Division, Darren Benedega, Executive Director of Sports, Culture and Recreation, and Myron Soloduk, Director of Corporate Services. What?
Darren's not here yet, so they're
Oh, Darren's in the washroom. Sorry, folks. He was with us. Anyways, so I would like to begin with a significant item in the budget that uniquely positions our ministry to support our growth in our provincial economy and assist Saskatchewan industries. And that is providing to Creative Saskatchewan Feature Film and Television Production Grant Program. I'm pleased to report that this initiative has surpassed our initial expectations. The Film and Television Grant Program was fully subscribed within a few short months of it being launched, supporting many exciting projects, including 2 dramatic series, a feature film, and several documentary and children's series. It has drawn a production to the province that brings with it world-class technology. This technology gives our province an immediate competitive advantage in this industry. Currently, Regina is on track to host one of the world's largest LED stages. There's only a handful of locations in Canada where LED production walls even exist. The $7.5 million in additional funding will allow for increased production in the province that will continue to build on our momentum and positively impact the economy, supporting sectors like our growing IT and digital industries, as well as arts, culture, and hospitality sectors. It's certainly an exciting time for the film industry in Saskatchewan, and we look forward to working with you. an additional $174,000 in supplementary funding for the Canadian-Saskatchewan bilateral agreement on sport participation. This support increases support opportunities for underrepresented groups in the province through federal funding and lottery trust fund matching investments. In 2022-23, Saskatchewan will receive an additional $174,000 due to the Indigenous supplement component. This supplement was only recently confirmed by the federal government, after my provincial and territorial colleagues and I lobbied them to extend it past 2022. The federal funding flows from Ministry of Parks, Culture and Sport to SaskSport, Inc., who manages and implements the bilateral initiatives on behalf of the province. For Indigenous supplement, SaskSport will invest $300,000, exceeding the required provincial component. One of the programs supported through the agreement is the Indigenous Coaches and Official Program, which supports the training and development of Indigenous facilitators and clinicians. The Ministry of Parks, Culture and Sport continues to offer programs and services that contribute to the well-being and the high quality of life for Saskatchewan residents and contribute to the province's economic growth. With that, I will turn it over to the chair, and my officials will be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Minister. We'll now open it up for questions. Ms. Mowat.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the Minister and officials who are here today. I do have some questions about these projects here. I guess we should start. We'll start with the subvote PC 18 on resource stewardship as support for provincial heritage and culture. So this was the $174,000 that you were just referring to. Just for clarification purposes, this $174,000 is flowing from the federal government into programs right now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
No, I didn't see my light come on, so I do apologize.
Okay. So you had mentioned the fact that you had mentioned some amount of a difference in breakdown. I wonder if you can explain, if some of those dollars are going, if all of those dollars are going to SaskSport to be allocated.
That's right. But it's like a matching, except we exceed the matching. And so that money comes from the Lottery Trust Fund. And so it goes to, as I indicated, for Indigenous coaching. It's just probably one of the smartest things we could be doing to encourage the Indigenous sports throughout the province.
Thank you. What is the figure? So what's the difference between what is being allocated provincially and what's being allocated federally, I guess, if you're saying that you exceed the matching?
Well, because we're committed to the program, we think it's very worthwhile. And because our lottery program is very successful, that we have the opportunity to match and exceed.
I mean, in terms of dollar amount, what does that look like?
Okay.
Sure, Twyla McDougall, Deputy Minister. I can answer that for you. On that particular component, the federal government will be providing $173,400 specific to the Indigenous supplement component, so it's very specifically targeted, and SaskSport will invest $300,000, so more than, no, not quite double. Yeah.
300,000, okay. So all of these dollars are being allocated today in this subvote toward the Indigenous supplement component?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Can you provide a little bit more detail about what this program is?
Dan French, Assistant Deputy Minister. So some of the programs that SaskSport specifically works through, so it's a Dream Brokers program. So it's a program that involves partnerships, that involves inner city kids, and that benefits from sports, culture, and recreation. Another is an Indigenous Sports Enhancement Program, raises the performance level of Indigenous athletes, trains long-term athlete development is another program. And as the Minister mentioned, Indigenous Coaching and Officials Program is something that was established in 2007 and will continue to meet and train the needs of coaches and officials involved in children and youth sports. And Indigenous Community Development Program is that provides direct funding to community organizations for sporting equipment purchases, for an example.
Thank you. In terms of those different programs, do you know how that funding allocation breaks down?
At this, sorry, no, not at this moment, no.
Okay. So I presume that that would be, like, that detail would be available through Sask Sport?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and it may vary year to year, but SASPORT is the organization that is leading these programs and this funding.
And how are the needs determined in terms of which communities will benefit, which organizations will benefit through the distribution of these funds?
Again, SASPORT is kind of the lead on this program. So they have criteria and they have application processes that communities and organization groups that they work with that would benefit from this funding.
Do you have a sense of whether this funding will be adequate to address the needs?
Again, I think this the point that we are significantly exceeding this fund is something that we feel, or through SASPORT, we feel that this is meeting this needs and committing to these funds.
Thank you. In terms of these programs, I agree with the Minister with the value that sport can have in people's lives, especially young people in some quite formative years. Do we have a sense of how the success of these programs is being measured?
Yes, Sports does have a variety of measurements they use, and they've even on their websites as well. They have success stories that they've shared. So again, SAS Sports would have those specific details.
Okay, thank you. In terms of the fact that we are at mid-year right now, and we're talking about sort of unexpected expenses, can you speak to why these allocations were not able to be forecasted for the budget during the regular budget cycle?
I can speak to that. We didn't know if they were going to, if the federal government was going to continue with the commitment to this project. And it was only after considerable pressure from the provinces and territories to say to the federal Minister of Sport, this is very worthwhile, and that you need to step up with your portion of the funding. And then because, like I said, Sask Lotteries has been fairly successful, we have the opportunity to exceed some other provinces and territories are just able to match the funding, but we're really committed to this. And so because we didn't have the commitment from the federal government when it was budget time, it was only after we had our ministers' meetings that we had the opportunity to really kind of pressure them into making the commitment to do the funding. So I'm not sure if you quite understand how SAS Sport works. It's like arm's length, right? So it's a really good organization. It's a really good way of us to being able to help with like putting this additional, having this additional money being flow through to it. But it also means that SAS Sport is the one who then looks at each one of the applications and the project that come in, and so it's arm's length. So it's a really good opportunity and a good way of providing funding to these different organizations and different sporting organizations.
Absolutely. In terms of making that decision of where the additional Sask Lotteries money went, can you speak to, why the decision to allocate the funds to this particular program as opposed to, another program in the creative sector?
I'll speak to that, and hopefully it'll help confirm how we proceed every year. We do have what we call a lottery committee that includes representatives from the ministry, from Sask Sport, from Sask Culture, and from Sask Parks and Recreation Association. And that committee sets the priorities each year and sets some parameters around that each year, so that those three agencies then have the ability to go out and provide funding aligned to those priorities.
So the priority for this year was set in this area? Is that what you're indicating? Sorry.
Well, the federal funding program was specific to Indigenous. And so any of the programs that we fund in that capacity are the ones that we have to focus on.
Okay.
And I think we did, you did share with you the different programs, the Dream Brokers programs, the Indigenous Sport Enhancement. And so those are the ones that have been allocated to receive.
Okay. In terms of, I'm just thinking of the fact that, across every sector, we're dealing with inflationary costs right now. So, I'm assuming an organization such as the Sask Arts Board, that type of thing would also benefit from additional funding. So I'm just, in terms of that decision-making process.
That's not part of this funding here, and so this was specific funding. So it's kind of like, okay, you have an envelope, and on that envelope, it specifically states this is what this funding is for, and so that's what we're discussing here today.
Yeah, so I understand that. I'm asking because you indicated that you put additional money into the envelope, like you matched more dollars.
We didn't put additional money. The lotteries put additional money into it.
Okay, so it was their decision where those additional funds made it? Yeah, go ahead.
Based on the priorities that we set as a committee, right? So they're not going blind every year. They've got a set of priorities that they operate on, and they meet quarterly to talk about progress. But the Lottery Trust Fund is a separate fund. There's actually, you probably can retrieve the annual report for it, but it's a very separate fund that looks after the revenues and profits that we receive here in Saskatchewan. And then it's that committee that allocates that. And it goes to community organizations that all across the province that have met the eligibility criteria. So Sask Arts Board, for example, is an agency of government and would not meet that criteria.
Thank you for clarifying that. That makes a lot of sense. I appreciate it. So I guess we'll move on, and I do have some questions around vote PC 19, which is the Creative Sask funding. Here we're talking about 7.5 million, and I understand that this 7.5 million allocation is going toward the film and television grant program. Is that correct?
Yes.
Can you speak to, you sort of listed some projects. Can you speak to which projects were supported or being supported by this funding? Some
Are confidential still, but the additional funding was as you know, during budget, we had increased by $8 million to a total of $10 million for Creative Saskatchewan. Within 3 months, that had all been accounted for in projects that were coming to Saskatchewan or within Saskatchewan. So then we had so many really good projects, additional projects that came on, and so I went and secured another 7.5 to bring it up to a total of 17.5 for the industry. And with that, we were able to, again, secure quite a few really good series, multiple-year series, for one thing, which is really good for the industry in that it's continuous work. And but we had King of Killers. I think you've probably heard us mention that. And that's a very substantial series. And then we have some other ones, but I don't think we can mention them just yet, only because there's confidentiality with them. Like one in that is taking place right now. We can't mention where it is because...
Yeah, I think we can mention that.
Can we mention it? We can't mention it. We just about blabbed. Sorry, we can't tell you anymore. Stay tuned. How's that? Only because there's confidentiality. They're shooting at this point in time. We can't have, people wanting to come see. It'd be very disruptive. And so until such time that, what do they say? It's a wrap. It's a can in the can. We can't disclose. But these are one of the really good things about Creative Saskatchewan is that they put it through a really rigorous process to ensure that each one of these projects that is being advanced is well funded and has absolutely fabulous capabilities of being sold to streaming, because one of the things we noticed is over COVID is people's viewing habits have changed substantially. And so there's a real need for content. And the best part about this is we're ready to provide it.
Yeah, I certainly understand the confidentiality piece. Maybe in terms of type of project, how many projects have been funded, any sort of information you can give about where this is going, yeah.
Go to children's. So we have 3 feature films. We have children's series. We have how many? 1, 2, 3. I think there's 4 multiple year series. It's and documentaries we've got, and we've got some really exciting projects in the works. But like I said, and I met some interesting people the other day, and they're bringing forward some really exciting ideas of what, and this is Saskatchewan talent. So I think we're very lucky, and it's turned out to be just the perfect time for Saskatchewan to really shine. And I think in my opening remarks, I talked about the LED wall, and it's a new form of being able to shoot inside. It's big, huge LED panels that It replaces a green screen, but it's like a green screen on steroids. It changes the whole dynamics of how, it's like how Star Wars and The Mandalorian were filmed, and so right now there's two big sound stages that have the LED walls in them, one in Vancouver and one in Toronto. And we're going to have the newest and the biggest and the best right here in Regina, which is pretty exciting stuff.
Thank you. And you were referring to world-class technology. Is this the technology that you're talking about?
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's exciting to hear all of those projects in the works. Is there an understanding on return on investment for government of number of dollars committed by grant and sort of what that brings into our Saskatchewan economy?
Absolutely. And because when a project is put forward, it has to be fully funded. Not through the government. It has to be fully funded before we can even look at it. So then these are very secure projects that are brought forward, right? And so we're then just supplementing it. And how this is the money is for goods and services that are to be spent here in this province. So that's where our provincial funding is going, is to the money that is being spent right here in the province.
So here's some approximations.
Okay, so for the additional, well, here's a good example is we've got for the 18.7 million spent, there's a spin-off of about over 43 million. Am I correct?
Pretty close.
Yeah.
So that is the total that is expecting to be spent in 22-23 fiscal year. Is that right? 18, is that what you said?
The 17.5, that's what we have set aside for this year.
Should I just clarify?
Yeah, if you can clarify
I
for
can
you.
just clarify for you. So I've got some just calculations, and remember, these are estimates, because until you actually have the economic activity, you don't know for sure. But we're estimating that the additional 7.5 million that you see in the supplemental estimates today will generate approximately 18.75 in Saskatchewan spend, just about 35 million in economic output, and create almost 160 jobs. And so that's only for the 7.5. It does not include the 10 million.
Do you have the expectation of the ROI for the 10 million as well?
It would be on the similar scale. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fantastic to hear about this. I think many of us were very disappointed when the film tax credit was canceled years ago. I wonder if you can speak to why that decision was made at that time and why it's being brought back now.
Well, you know, this is a totally different kind of program, because that program was not centered specifically on the spend in Saskatchewan. And so what we found, and when we looked at how that money was being where it was going. And a lot of it was not staying in Saskatchewan. And so when looking at how do we do a program that in fact benefits the taxpayers of this province, we established this program in a way that the money that's being spent has to stay in the province. There's no bleeding off outside the province. So the money that the provincial government is putting into this program all goes towards goods and services being spent here in the province. So it's a totally different kind of program than what was before. Also, too, what is needed in and what is being filmed is totally different today because of people's viewing habits have changed so much. With all the new streaming platforms, it's a very different kind of industry today than it was before. And so because of that and the size and the talent that we have here, we're well positioned today to meet that need because well, let's face it, before, maybe there was, I don't even know, but there's over 200 streaming platforms today. They need content. And so we're ready to do that. And like I said, Saskatchewan is, we've got some really good talent. We have people who are up for this challenge, and they're prepared. And we've got good stuff happening right now.
Comparing to the previous tax credits, you mentioned that some dollars were going out of province. How does the ROI for these dollars compare to the ROI for the tax credit?
It's a totally different kind of industry, and I guess that's why it's very different. You can't just kind of put it up on the screen and do a direct comparison, because as I said, the kind of programs that are being shot today are totally different. And so because of that, it's pretty hard to just do a complete then and now.
Is there just because we got the dollar figure for every, for 7.5 million that is being spent, there was, I think you said 18.7 million spent, and then 35 in economic output. Do we know how that compares, just in terms of measuring success of the program?
This program, though, the money is to be spent on goods and services. That wasn't before, and that's why it's different.
Yeah, I understand that. Just in terms of any sort of value for the program that existed prior.
I'm not sure. Did they do an economic impact before?
Yes, there was, but I think what the point was, this new program with specific criteria and the change, and again, maybe I'm misunderstanding, but it's they didn't have those goods and specific language of the goods and services on Saskatchewan spend. So that's where those economic drivers are coming from, the $18 million specifically on goods and services, and then, of course, hotels and food and lumber and all the other stuff with the economic spin-offs.
Mm-hmm. In terms of going forward, you mentioned that some of the projects are multi-year projects. How does the spending, how does the program interact with a multi-year project? Is it only for the first year, or is there sort of a long-term planning that the industry can count on? What assurances do they have that the program will continue to exist in the years moving forward?
I can speak to that. Really, this program is no different than any other programs within, I think, government, but specifically I can speak for our ministry in the sense that we do have to go through the budget process every year and substantiate what our request. And so this is no different, and it will go through that budget process.
So just for clarification then, if there's a multi-year series, you've only talked to them about this year, or there's no opportunity for a multi-year grant?
I believe they sign, and I'd have to confirm with Creative Sask, but I believe they sign just one series at a time. Mm-hmm. Right? Yeah. So they'll talk about a multi-series, and sometimes the producer too may change his mind, right, depending on the success of the first series. So there's a little bit of fluid motion there.
You've spoken to this a little bit already, I think, but can you explain the decision to move this program into a grant program rather than a tax credit?
I can speak to that as well. There's several advantages of a production grant over the tax credit, mainly because we're going to support projects that are already pre-sold. So in essence, there's already a market for them. So we're not investing in a product that we're hoping will get to market. And of course, the minister spoke about there's no leakage as far as non-Sask labor. It's not covered. It's only Saskatchewan spend. Whereas a tax credit has some leakage there. Also, it encourages Saskatchewan ownership of some of these productions. because there is a higher incentive for productions where a Sask producer owns a share of the finished product. So they'll collaborate. The production grant also provides ease of administration and transparency, which was really important for our minister, so that we could very easily explain where the spend was, how much economic activity it generated, and so on. And really, I guess the other piece is that there's been a change in the economy in the film industry, and this just provides us an opportunity to fill a gap right now. There's just more product out there wanting to be produced than sound stages and facilities.
Thank you. You spoke a little bit about demand for the grants being quite high. I wonder if you can speak to what that looked like in terms of the request for additional allocation of funding here, and why these dollars weren't budgeted back in the spring.
Well, because we didn't know how successful the uptake was going to be, and so when we did the first offering, you never know, right? And that's how this industry is. But it was so successful, the uptake, with well thought out, well funded programs, and was within 3 months, it was fully funded and fully used up. So, yet we had some really good projects that were coming in. So that's when we realized we needed to increase the funding so that we can ensure that this is very successful.
In terms of the number of projects that were covered by the initial budget allocation and how many are going to be covered by this additional allocation, do you have that breakdown in terms of how many projects we're actually talking about here?
Okay, I did some quick math, and it actually adds up. So to date, we have 23 productions that have been approved. 12 of them are from before.
From the first.
From the first, that 10 million, and 11 after.
Okay, thank you. That concludes my questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Seeing no more questions, we will now proceed to vote. Before we go to vote, I would ask the Minister if she has any closing comments.
Oh, I just want to thank you for your interest and the fruitful discussion we had. And I'm glad, this is an exciting time in the industry. And so thank you so much for your support, because we know that everyone in Saskatchewan is going to benefit extensively from both things we discussed this evening. I want to thank the officials for the support and the help, and turn it over to the committee. Thank you.
Ms. Moat, do you have any closing comments?
Yeah, I just thank the minister and the officials for their time today, and for doing this work. Take care.
Thank you. We'll now move to vote on 27, Parks, Culture and Sport. Resource Stewardship, subvote PC 18 in the amount of $174,000. Is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Community Engagement, subvote PC 19 in the amount of $7,500,000. Is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Community engagements, Parks, Culture, Sport, vote of, vote 27 in, $7,674,000. I will now ask a member to move the following resolution. Resolve that there be granted to His Majesty for the 12 months ending March 31st, 2023, the following sums for Parks, Culture, and Sport in the amount of $7,674,000. Do I have a mover? Mr. Keesig. Is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. We'll now take a brief recess to change officials. I didn't finish signing there, sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah. Yep. Good afternoon. We'll now consider the supplementary estimates for number 1, vote 73, corrections, policing, and public safety, subvotes CP06, public safety, CP13, custody, supervision, and rehabilitation services, and CP15, policing and community safety services. I would ask officials to please introduce themselves before they speak, and don't touch the microphones. Hansard will take care of that. Minister, would you please introduce your officials and give your opening comments?
Yes. Oh, there. I know. Last time I got into big time trouble because I kept touching the thing. Anyway, thank you for having us here this evening. It's Dale Larson. Do you know how many years it's been since Dale has been with us? Dale Larson, Deputy Minister, Corrections and Policing, and on my left is Marlo Pritchard, President, SPSA. Pleased to be here with you this afternoon or this evening to provide you with information regarding the additional funding that we are requesting being provided to the Ministry of Corrections, Policing, and Public Safety for the 22-23 fiscal year. The ministry requires additional funding of $7.349 million in 22-23 to support the operation of the province's correctional facilities. The correctional facilities are facing salary and overtime pressures, as well as other operational pressures related to food service and offender provisions. The Provincial Disaster Assistance Program also requires additional funds of $10.825 million. This is due to increased demand for compensation for uninsurable losses as a result of natural disasters, principally flooding and claims related to the spring blizzards. As the province's lead agency for the pandemic response, SPSA is faced with substantial unanticipated expenditures of $31.6 million. $21 million of this amount is in response to fighting wildfires. The remaining portion is for operating the Provincial Emergency Coordination Center and maintenance for air operations. Finally, an estimated $1 million is required to support the RCMP response to the James Smith Cree Nation incident that occurred in September of 2022. We'll now be pleased to answer any questions, that the committee may have on these additional costs for the Ministry of Policing, Corrections, and Public Safety. Thank you.
Thank you for your remarks. Minister, we'll now open it up to questions. Or great.
Thank you. Thank you to the minister and to the officials who have joined us this evening. I do have some questions on each of these pieces, and we don't have very much time, so I will get into them here. Maybe we should start with subvote CP06 on the Saskatchewan Public Safety Agency and Provincial Disaster Assistance Program. In terms of the Public Safety Agency, I know you did make some initial overarching comments. I wonder if you can speak to what the Public Safety Agency dollars are being allocated for, what supports the agency provided with these dollars.
Thank you for the question. We'll call our VP, Teresa Florazone, up to talk about the breakdown of the budget, please.
Teresa Florazone, the Vice President of Corporate Services and CFO for SPSA. So the funding that is required for SPSA is to cover the additional expenditures mainly for the wildfire. This year, the wildfires was above the normal 5-year average, and an additional $21 million is being requested for that funding. There's an additional expenditures in regards to about $2.5 million for general operations and as it relates to maintenance and air operations, as noted in the minister's speaking notes. And and additional operating expenses of about $7.5 million that are required for our Provincial Emergency Operations Center supports.
Thank you. I'm just deciding which path to go on first. In terms of the wildfires, can you speak to what was budgeted for, what the previous allocation expected versus what we experienced?
For the wildfire, in the annual year, the actual budgeted value for SPSA is in the range of $95 million.
And sort of like how is that budget forecast? Like how do you forecast the amount of dollars that need to go toward it?
So the budget is based on the prior year's budgets. In order for us to have any additional dollars, it is based on incremental costs as it relates to collective bargaining increases or inflationary increases. Those get added on to the budgets annually. The average wildfires for the year are normally in the range of 360, 400,000 on a 5-year average. We look at that and actually start projecting our projections for our operating dollars based on the number of fires.
Thank you. And is there an increase, or has there been an increase in these dollars year over year as a trend, or is this sort of an anomaly?
On average, our increase in budget over the last number of years has not increased a lot for the budget, as we have the opportunity to come to supplementary estimates when there are increased average years. So over the last 3 years, it has stayed pretty stagnant.
So this is the first year in a few years that you've had to come to supplementary estimates for this?
No, there's a difference between the budget versus the actual supplementary request. So budget is what we get at the beginning of the year. So those numbers that we get at the beginning of the year haven't changed a lot. And we've seen increases year over year that we always have to come back through supplementary estimates.
Okay. I suppose what I'm endeavoring to point out here is that if there is an increase year over year, at what point do we start to increase the budget for these measures? Which is maybe more of a question for the minister or a philosophical question than it is for you. Yeah.
And I can pass it on to the minister after I talk. The budget request for an agency does go through the normal budget process. We'll go in and ask for additional dollars, but budget dollars are limited. And with that, we have to work within the suggested proposed limitations within the entire Government of Saskatchewan budget limitations. So with that, we definitely need to go in and ask for additional dollars going forward, which has been recognized. We just, at this point in time, it's been limited. There's been a lot of COVID dollars that we've had to spend over the last number of years. So as a partner through that bigger government, we've had to work within those limitations.
In terms of you also mentioned that I think there was $2 million that had been allocated for additional maintenance and air operations. Can you elaborate on that?
So in the air operations area, and if you want more details about what goes on into the air operations, we can have Steve Roberts, the Vice President of Operations, talk about that. The air operations is based on maintenance and repairs for the agency on the air aviation that is within the agency. Within that, there is maintenance repairs that has to be happening on an annual basis. And as the repairs and as costs increase, the cost for maintenance repairs, when you tear a plane apart, you only know at it what the costs are when you're actually taking that plane apart. When that plane is taken apart, you'll find errors, or I shouldn't call them errors, they're actual maintenance pieces that have to be repaired. Those costs of the plane parts have actually increased sometimes up to 300%. And that's the increase here for parts on the aviation.
So it's primarily due to the increase in the price of parts. That's what you're indicating?
Absolutely.
Okay. And in terms of the budgeting process for next year, is there an expectation that those costs will remain about the same? Like just in terms of what happened here that wasn't budgeted for and how we move forward in the next year budget cycle?
So again, we would use the normal budget cycle. We have maintenance and aviation repairs, and these anomalies that come up through the maintenance process, we would come back through supplementary. We have not asked for additional dollars. We hope in the near future to do a full review of our operational aviation portfolio and actually come back and look at, instead of spending money on the maintenance of these airplanes, actually to have advanced aviation equipment and planes that are more, I would say, 2020, 25 ready for the be able to fight the fires within Saskatchewan.
Is there a concern with the lifetime of the aircraft are being extended beyond, what is appropriate at this time?
Steve Roberts probably can answer that question a little better. Just on the life of the aviation, every time planes, and especially over the winter season, the aviation are actually taken apart every single winter. So you're basically taking the entire plane apart, you're looking at all the maintenance required and putting that maintenance back together and repairing the plane back to new every single season. Steve?
Good evening. It's Steve Roberts. I'm the Vice President of Operations, which puts me also in charge of the aviation fleet for the Public Safety Agency. For our aviation fleet, we not only manage these aircraft, but we also ensure that they're adequately upgraded. So over the course of lifespan, they are no longer in the state that they were when we bought them. We have managed to extend their life by upgrading certain components and making sure that they're viable for our lifespan. At some point, we will have to look at a renewal of the fleet, but currently the fleet is in good operational condition, and we're continuing to meet all the requirements to keep them operational in a safe manner.
Okay, thank you. Any idea when at some point will come?
Well, we have upgraded the whole fleet. It takes about, in this case, almost like 20 years to update the whole. So you start at one end, it's sort of a continuous process. So even in this current fiscal budget, we're actually securing new aircraft that will be operational for the start of next season. So they don't all get changed out at once. It's an ongoing process. So we will actually have a brand new air tanker working as of April of this year, and 2 more guide aircraft that will be brand new to the government of Saskatchewan.
What is the total number of aircraft in the fleet?
17. 17.
Okay. Sorry, 70?
17.
17, okay. I was like, I thought I heard you correct the first time, and then I was like, what are they doing with 70 aircraft? Okay, sorry. Yeah, appreciate this. I'll move on to some questions about the provincial disaster relief program here. In terms of these additional dollars that are being provided here, I wonder if you can speak to what additional supports were provided with this allocation of $10.8 million.
It's Noel McVenna, Executive Director of the Provincial Disaster Assistance Program. So these dollars represent claim payments made to claimants primarily related to the spring blizzards, but we've also had a number of other weather events in terms of plow winds, tornadoes, and heavy rains within the province this year.
And how does one forecast how many of these events will take place?
We really don't have an effective mechanism to forecast how many events we'll have in a particular summer.
Have we seen the number of severe weather events increasing in years past?
So this year is a particularly large year with 130 designations. That's far beyond what we had for the last 3 years.
So we haven't seen an increase of this nature for the past 3 years?
No. Probably the previous year that it was on this magnitude would be something like 2016.
Okay. And were there specific communities that were impacted more heavily than others?
Pretty much the entire southeast corner of the province was affected very heavily this year.
So you mentioned that these dollars are primarily for an increase in claims. Are there any dollars being allocated for anything else besides increased claims?
There would be a portion of it that goes to paying for the adjusters, engineers, and appraisers that evaluate these claims, but there's no capital or anything of that nature in it.
Are there any additional staff positions there?
We have staffed some term positions within this. I'm just looking. I believe our salary dollars are still below the budgeted value, even with the additional term positions.
What? Okay. Do you know? So your salary levels are still below the budgeted dollars?
That is correct.
Okay.
Yeah, these incremental dollars are not paying for staffing at this point in time.
Okay, thank you. All right, I think that concludes my questions on CP06. We'll move on to CP13. CP13, where we're talking about correctional facilities and custody services. Here I see a value of $7.3 million being provided for custody services. The minister, I think, mentioned a bit around salary overtime. I wonder if you can speak to what this breakdown looks like of how many of these dollars were used for personnel, and you said, I think, food services and all of those pieces.
We don't have to hit it.
I don't have to hit it. Heather Scriver, ADM for CSRS. The breakdown is approximately $5.4 million for overtime, which includes hospital supervision, nursing personnel, and correctional officers. In regards to the food services cost, it's about $1 million, and that has to do with price increases that are beyond our control. Offender counts have gone up. We have personal items that we have to purchase for our clients, be it mattresses or personal hygiene products. And also our CVA costs have gone up because, of course, fuel costs have increased exponentially that we have no control over.
Thank you. What are the point-in-time counts for each adult and youth facility in the province?
Can I do it from last year on this date and today?
Sure.
You okay with that?
And then I'm also interested in how that relates to capacity for each facility.
Absolutely. So last year, on November 30th, the Regina Correctional Centre had a total of 707 offenders. So they were 90.4% operational utilization. Prince Albert Correctional Centre had a total count of 442, which is 89.1% utilization. Sask Hospital North Battleford had a count of 22, which was 45.8%. Saskatoon Correctional Centre, 495, which is at a 97.6% utilization. Our White Spruce Training Centre a year ago was at 76.9%. Besnard Lake Correctional Camp, 68%. White Birch, our remand facility here for females, was at 50%. And Pine Grove Correctional Centre, their count was at 200, and they're at 120.5% over capacity. Do you want the total counts for those facilities
Please,
as well?
yeah.
Okay, so Saska Hospital North Battleford was 22, Saskatoon Correctional Centre 495, White Spruce 30, Besnard Camp 17, White Birch 8, and Pine Grove was at 200, like I said. So as of today, the Regina Correctional Centre is at 709, which is 90.7% utilization. Sask Hospital is at 25, which is a 52.1% utilization. Besnard Camp, 40% at a total count of 10. White Birch, there's 6 with 37.5% operational utilization. White Spruce Training Centre is at 31, which is 70.9% utilization. Prince Albert Correctional Centre is at 508, which is at 102.4% utilization. The Saskatoon Correctional Centre is at 530, which is 104.5% utilization. And Pine Grove Correctional Centre is at 234, which is at 141% overutilization.
Thank you. When we talk about the facilities that are over capacity, what spaces are being utilized for bed space that were designed for something else?
We have various areas that have been converted into dorms. At the Pine Grove Correctional Centre, the gymnasium has been modified for capacity with double bunking staffing, and of course, the programs that we offer at Pine Grove. We've had offenders sleeping in our chapels, and we've double bunked as much as we can within our facilities.
And what percentage of inmates right now are on remand?
Do you have that chart, Mark? Do you have it? Oh, sure, I have it right here. So a little over half. So we have 916 sentenced offenders and 1,158 remanded offenders. So a little over half.
Wow. Okay. Thank you for that. We are getting close to time here, so I do want to ask some questions about CP15 as well. Can you speak to what additional resources were brought in here in terms of the RCMP allocation of $1 million in response to the James Smith Cree Nation incident?
Good afternoon, or good evening, I guess. Rob Cameron, ADM of Policing. I apologize, I've got a bit of a cold, so I'm fighting that. But so your question was about what type of resources were brought in. So there was a variety of resources brought in. As you can expect, it's a very complex situation, investigation. But some of those would be members, RCMP members that were brought in from other divisions to provide supplementary assistance to the RCMP. Of those members, some would have been for scene security and processing. Some would have been for major crime investigations. There would have been a variety of members that were brought in for special interviewing and victim services work. as well. And beyond that, some specialty sections, for example, blood splatter analysis, forensic interviewing, forensic ident people. There was also a variety of physical assets brought in, airplanes, helicopters, all of that used for a variety of different things within that investigation. If you look at the phases of the actual investigation itself, the pursuit for the suspects, and then, of course, the investigation still continues now, and there's still the RCMP are still actively doing parts of that investigation, so that's ongoing.
Do you have a sense of how many officers came in, and how does it work in terms of the partnership with other provinces? Is there a sharing agreement, or how does that all
Yeah,
work?
so roughly, I'd have to give you a rough number because the RCMP hasn't given me a definite number yet either, but it appears to be about 147 to 150 resources were brought in. The way it works is through the RCMP contract. There is an ability for the RCMP to share resources interprovincially, and it's covered in our provincial policing services agreement. Pretty common scenario when you have a large-scale operation or something like this, that we would bring in police officers from different parts of the country, particularly when you need specialty resources. For example, blood splatter investigators, there's only so many of those folks in the country, so they have to come from different areas. Sometimes I think we brought one in from Alberta and one in from Ottawa in this case.
So that means, so you said like 147 to 150 resources, or you're talking about people?
People, yes, humans.
Just checking. And how quickly were they able to come in?
Actually, extremely quickly. We were able to have them deployed into Saskatchewan within the first 2 to 3 days. In addition to those resources, I think it's important to mention we also utilized other resources from our Provincial Protective Services, approximately 38 officers there. In a large-scale investigation like that, there's a lot of things that have to be done, and of course, you need to also continue policing for the area and in the province. So, but their ability to bring them into the province was extremely rapid.
Thank you. So in terms of the 1 million that's being allocated here, can you speak to sort of what exactly this is paying for?
Well, it's the things I mentioned earlier with the resources, the human resources, the aircraft, specialty investigators, the blood splatter, the forensic ident. It also involves some victim services folks from out of Ottawa to help with managing families and obviously the victims themselves that had survived. There's also some technical equipment that was brought in. There was some advanced investigational techniques that were required to come in. So it really focuses around the people and the equipment that was required to carry out that investigation. Of course, now, had it gone to a situation where it had gone to court, there would be even more requirement for disclosure and things like that. But at this point, that's what it covered.
Thank you for that. Were there any additional costs that were covered by the federal government as well?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
It would be the responsibility of, in this situation, it's a provincial issue, so we in essence foot the bill.
Okay. And I assume that if there was a similar situation elsewhere, that we would be sending resources to help in other provinces, like that's what the agreement looks like? Or?
It's certainly possible, and in fact, it's not unprecedented. It's actually fairly common, but it can also be for large-scale events. For example, the Olympics in 2010, RCMP members were deployed from all over the country to support that. The Fort Mac fires a few years back, RCMP members were sent from this division, in fact, to help with that, with evacuations and things like that. It's a very common process or procedure.
And James Smith Cree Nation has called for local Indigenous-led policing in their community. I'm wondering what steps the ministry is taking to move forward on that.
Well, we have signed a memorandum with the federal government and the PAGC. I think they're estimating it's going to take about 18 months to make a determination about what is actually needed on reserve within that within the PAGC. So we're participating in that, and it will continue until we end up with a finished product for a self-directed Indigenous policing service.
Thank you. That concludes my questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Seeing that there's no more questions, I'll ask the minister if she has any closing comments.
No, other than thanking you for your time. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms.
Just thank you to the minister and the officials for their expedient responses tonight. Appreciate it.
Thank you. We'll now move on to vote on 73, Corrections, Policing, Public Safety. Public Safety vote CP 06, the amount of $42,425,000. Is that agreed? Carried. Custody Supervision and Rehabilitation Services, subvote CP 13 in the amount of $7,349,000. Is that agreed? Carried. Policing and Community Safety Services, subvote CP 15 in the amount of $1 million. Is that agreed? Carried. Policing, Corrections, and Public Safety vote 73 for $50,774,000. I will now ask a member to move the following resolution. Resolve that there be granted to His Majesty for the 12 months ending March 31st, 2023, the following sums for policing, corrections, and public safety in the amount of $50,774,000. Do I have a mover? Mr. Grewal, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried.
Corrections policing right here, and I'll hand out the report.
You guys are good to go. You guys are good to go. Thank you. Sorry. I thought when we concluded, I thought they were going to go. Committee members, you have before you a draft of the fourth report of the Standing Committee on Intergovernmental Affairs and Justice. We require a member to move the following motion. The fourth report of the Standing Committee on Intergovernmental Affairs and Justice be adopted as presented to the Assembly. Do I have a mover? Mr. Hugh Nerlin. Is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. I'll get you to adjourn. I will spread it.
Sign, date, and sign.
Okay.
Sign two of these.
That completes our committee's business for tonight. Thank you to the committee members. I will ask a member to move the motion to adjourn. Ms. Lambert has moved. All agreed? Carried. This committee stands adjourned until the next call of the chair.
Perfect.